Say we can start. It's like 56 people, so yeah. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting organized by Udo Padova. For those of you who don't know, Udo is a students association which aims at helping students and the university community in general. We strongly believe that in order for the university to improve, students' proposals and initiatives must have a central role. Therefore, we usually launch campaigns. For example, we recently launched a campaign called Too Much, which is about like tuition fees and student donations, which, by the way, I strongly suggest you to go sign our petition. And I think Georgia will send you the link in the chat somewhere. Yeah. Yeah, so just follow us on social media where you can find all the information you need, and we will also link the social media pages in the chat. Today, we are here with Professor Teresa Farroni, which is a professor and researcher at the University of Padova. And first of all, I want to thank the professor for having accepted our invitation to tell us more about atypical development disorders and new technologies. And we have chosen this topic because we strongly believe that there's a lot of misinformation about atypical patterns of development, and therefore we would like to deepen the topic with the subject with the professor and her PhD student, Irene Valori, which we, by the way, thank as well. So yeah, now without further ado, I think I will just leave the floor to Professor Farroni.
Thank you, Silvia. I really like the idea that students are protagonists of their life, students' life. So that's the first reason why I accept it. The second reason is because I think that we are actually a little bit out of the schema. And so we are trying to include all our knowledge about the cognitive development, neurocognitive development into the practice of everyday time with these kids that have general problems, let's say. I will just go through different main points that I want to underline with you. And ideally, I would love to have discussions with all of you, but I can understand that it's quite difficult if the number is big, but we will try. So please stop me, ask. What we want to do with Irene is also to present some video and show you what in practice could be our ideas, okay? So I just want to start. I have a few slides, but maybe I can just go through them very quickly. If you want me to stop more in detail, just let me know. But I think that the idea is not to describe every single aspect, but just have a general idea what does it mean to work with these kids and how to use the new technologies in order to have some support for that, okay? So let me start with the slides, which are somewhere here. Okay, and I can just go up, sorry. Here we are. Okay, look how nice is your picture. Okay, so the title is Atypical Development and Use of New Technology. We met Irene Valori, which is a student of mine, PhD student. Okay, starting from the general point. So the general theoretical point is that when we talk about cognitive development, we don't have just to fix our minds in the typical language, memory, attention, and that's it. Okay, when we think about cognitive development, we have to do and to have a step back, thinking about what is before that is helping to develop a cognitive development, okay? So to develop cognition. So we have to consider that we start our life with some physical aspects, okay? So we have some genetics, the predisposed mechanisms that we are using from the very beginning. But this is not all, actually. Everything is happening from the very beginning, or is written there, is very much changed or modulated by the environment. So when we start our development, we have to interact with the environment through what? Our sensors, okay, our perceptual sensors. And we have to interact in terms of action. So we have to be active while we are interacting with the environment. So we have the physical, the sensory, and the motor development that are the pre-activity that we have to include before going to the cognitive development. And the cognitive development is related to the social and cognitive development and communicative development. So as you may see here, we have arrows that are bidirectional. So that means that the physical cerebral development is related and modulated the sensory perceptual development, and it's the same side, the sensory is modulating the motor development, but also vice versa. That means that motor development can also change some physical cerebral development. So we have a development that is interconnected, and whatever will be our destiny, what we will be, and our final state of brain development is not predetermined, but is determined on the basis of this. Can you see here this valley? And this valley is everything that can happen during our development. Okay, so wherever this little ball will go will be defined not by itself, but from where and what kind of ballet each individual will keep. So that is okay, this is just a little example, dynamic example. You can see the balls, and you can see that whatever they will just go down, they will change their color, and they will be different. So this is the individual variabilities that we have. And if we consider the atypical development in terms of this variability, we have also to understand that every kind of observation that we want to give has to be related to individual in itself. Okay, so the individual variabilities is the first important aspects to consider, and not just in general and treat them as a big group. Okay, let me go down if I can, sorry. Okay, so here how the brain develops, as we said also during our class. Actually, this is an approach that is defined neuroconstructivist. Now you can understand the words. So we interact, our brain interacts with the environment, and thanks to this interaction, we have different connections within the brain. And these different connections are starting from the very beginning of our life. That is not at the newborn's level, but before, in the prenatal level. This connectivity is all the experiences and interactions that we have during our life. Okay, so we have, if the environment can work on this system, that means that we have a big responsibility on the way and which kind of stimulations we give to kids, babies, and later on in children. Okay, so these three aspects are connected. Cerebral changes are related to the behavior, that means what we see, our functions, okay? But at the same time, these structures and functions can be interchanged. So the environment, the stimulation from the environment can change the cerebral activities can be presented. Okay, so this is the first point. So the first point is when we see a child that is considered in an atypical development, we have to start to understand what kind of development he has or she has, but also what kind of behavior individually. And we will see what does it mean. Let's go further. So this is the first thing. The other thing is that when we interact, okay, with the environment, this connectivity is basically creating some networks, brain networks that are related to specific activities. So when we said we are using just the, I don't know, the 5% of our brain, it's just a stupid and myth that is our ordinary way to describe the brain. Brain is always active, always. So whatever is the cognitive actions that you can make, you can read, you can write, you can run, okay? It's not that you are activating one specific area of the brain. What your brain is doing is connecting different parts of the brain, okay? Even very distant one from each other. And this is allowing, this connectivity is allowing to have at the same time more part of the brains invested in what you are doing. So this large scale brain networks is something that we have to consider. Why is important? Because if we think that just one little area is devoted to the reading, okay, or motor actions, that area is not working. We don't have anything to do with that, okay? But if we think that is not just one area, one location that is interacting within the brain, that is active within the brain, but there are more parts of the brain, then in this sense, thanks to the plasticity of the brain, we can create different connectivities, okay? So that is why we think that working on stimulations of baby in a particular way means trying to activate different connectivity within the brain. So that is why we have started with this idea. I'm trying to follow you, to drive you in the reasons why it's important to work in a different way with these kids. So if we think in terms of these networks, I want to show you very generally three main networks that we have. We have many of them, but three main networks that are activated within the brain when we are trying to learn, when we are trying to interact and communicate with the environment. So things about kids that goes to school, you that go to school, me that I'm teaching. So me that I'm learning, I'm walking, you know, whatever I'm doing, which part of the brain, what kind of connections are we activated within it? And so there are at least the three main networks that I like, and we are actually touching with our techniques that are defined in this way. The first one is the default mode network. Then let's judge one, which is the central executive networks. And then there is one in the middle that is defined as salience network. So let's move, okay, sorry, I went back and I didn't want to. Okay, let's just keep the first and the second one for a second, and let's go directly to the central executive networks. These executive functions that you can see in here are really the very, very important, because what are they? The executive functions are the way in which we organize our life, the way in which we keep attentions on things or direct our attentions, shift from one task to the other, or the way in which we process our speed. Think about preparing an exam, okay? So organize your time spending to what to study first, how long do you have to study, what do you know, how much you have to control the speed, because the exam is very soon, and so you have to be faster. And everything is, whatever is activated in this way is called executive functions. When you are scared, okay, so you are worried about the results of your exam, or when your exam is not going very well and you have to manage these frustrations. You want to keep it, the votes like it is, or you want to just wait and give the time another time. So these things are everything that you are using, memory, okay, and self-organizations, is everything is related with the, simple everyday task, okay? So you have activations, focus, efforts, emotion, memory, actions. All these things are activities that kids of different ages have to cope with. Can you imagine how difficult is that? But as we say also in class, for the one that are there in attending my course, these executive functions is starting from the very beginning of our life, when you are little babies and you have to try to cope with the frustration of being hungry or being scared, being alone, and so on. All these things are within this big box. So these executive functions are really important, and you may immediately understand how they are difficult, how difficult they are for the atypical development babies. So if you think in the let's say the ADHD, so hyperactivity babies, the one that cannot control, they are really aggressive, they cannot stop, they don't have the ability to keep their attention in one task. Or, as we say, the autism population. So they have very, they don't even reach the level of having emotion, maybe, or to produce emotions in the communicative way, like a typical development kids. So we know that these group functions can be stimulated and increased. So it's not just the way in which we can stimulate to do that, to increase this ability, but there is one main point that is never considered, which is what are the obstacles that can actually create difficulties to these kids to use these executive functions. So this is in the other side, how do we observe that? Okay, so one way is how can we stimulate and increase the abilities of these children, but on the other way is what is that is oppressing them and they are not able to learn. And this is actually the point that we are focusing on. Why? If some kids are not able to produce language, or they are not able to pay attention to things, okay? So if we're trying to work on these functions, the only thing that we do is to increase their frustrations, okay? So our question is why they are not able to do that. So if there is something that is really creating an obstacle, Adele Diamond, which is one big researcher, very big researcher, she's working in Canada, and she was saying that the big rule that has, in order to create these problems in these kids, is the stress. So when you fail, okay, you fail to learn because you are not able to learn, because you have some problems and you cannot memorize, you get attentions, okay? We don't have to think that everybody's learning in the same way, okay? Being afraid of making mistakes is another big point, okay? And we have to try the way that we think the children, we have to make the children to think that they can learn, that they can fail, because in order to learn, you have to fail. So if that means that otherwise it is not, you are not trying, okay? And then the third aspect that is very important, that is really creating a big problem, is to feel alone. So to feel socially isolated. And this is important because our brain is not working in the same way when he feels alone. When the peoples are feeling alone, they are just not working the same way. Feeling alone, it means many different things, but in terms of what is related to learning, is not being inserted in the class. Autistic children, atypical development children feel different from the others, okay? So the atypical development children are creating activities, they are fighting, they are collaborating and so on. The atypical are not doing that. Okay, so that is the difference with the typical development kids. So these things need to be taken into consideration. Second things. The third thing is that these executive functions seems to work better when you are fit. Okay, was something that the Greek were saying. Okay, when your body has a good fit, the body and you are better in learning. Okay, that means the motor and the cognitive functions in the brain are not separated. So this is an important point, because that means that when we move, that could be play baskets or making a run or making whatever you want. In this way, you activate the mechanisms that allow to have a better cognition, so better memory, better attentions, and so on. And you can see at the neural network, what does it mean? So you can be able to have a better control, better planifications. When you walk, you have, or you run, or when you play baskets, you have to control your actions, not just alone, per se, just the action, but you also have to integrate and collaborate with the others. So we can work through the motor aspects to reach the cognitive level and the cognitive functions. So this is something that the brain is teaching us, okay? Not and never work in a separate way. Sorry. So these bidirectional and connections between different brain areas, as we said, we can see because automatically in the motor areas, when we measure and we program our actions, our motor actions, we see how the premotor area, for example, is associated with other specific activations in the brain. So the areas, the motor areas, prefrontal and the motor area are actually integrated, their connections, these are the connectivity that we were talking about, in order to execute some plans, okay? And this is the central executive functions, okay? So you have seen everything is needed in order to activate and promote learning. The default mode network is exactly the opposite. Okay? When we talk about the default mode network, we are in front to another, sorry, the title is in Italian, another big ability that humans has, and not just humans, even animals, which is creativity, okay? So the default mode network seems to be involved when the individual is creating new ideas. So it's something that there are some studies that are showing that actually when you present or you ask, one time being done is to test with an MRI. So this machine that is measuring the brain oxygenations in the brain, in the activations in the brain, is showing with different techniques, and not just the MRI, but also other, actually these are mainly MRI, but other techniques has been used. And what this is being shown, that every time you are creating, you don't have the activations of this frontal area. So the frontal area is the area that is involved, for example, for the executive functions that we were talking about before, okay? So whenever we are creating, these areas are actually going down, okay? So they are inhibited. So less connectivity when we have to create. You know what does it mean? That creativity is based on something that is not related to what you know, but on what you are. It's like a sort of including yourself within that activity. You are considering yourself in something that you are creating. So the default mode network is related to the self, but is also related to not doing anything. Okay, is that great? So when your mother is saying, okay, come on, you're sitting there, you're not doing anything, you are watching TV, or you're staring in front of the mirror, the windows, and not doing anything, and you have to say, money is my default mode network, because that is exactly what it is. So whenever you are activating, you are, creating something new, like for example, the one researcher was testing the singers of the when they were actually creating new songs. Okay, so with no schemas, just creating by itself. So the low activation in the frontal area is demonstrating the involvement of this network. And this network is activated when you decrease your activity. It means that you enter in that stage. For example, the meditations is one of that, okay, where you leave every kind of regulations and you limited your brain activity resources. So it's exactly the opposite. And with these limitations, what you have is that you also take out your emotions, okay? So reasoning and emotions goes away. Why is important everything, what we are saying? Because whenever we work with these atypical development groups, we have to consider that we have to allow them not always to control, but work and use the default mode network in order to help all the other networks that are working or not working, okay? So we can use that with the relaxations, taking emotions away in order to modulate our processing of learning from the other. So cognitive control network is one thing and default mode network is the other. The default mode network is a mental space in which we are with ourselves, with our imaginations. And when we program, when we anticipate the situation, when we read a tale, for example. Okay, so everything that is taking away what you already know is the default mode network. And the self-experience is another point to our using of the technology. We're not losing the point, okay? So we are reaching there. Is the self-experience. The self-experience is based on the fact that we have these things that is us, that is always with us when we learn, when we interact, when we watch the TV, when we are meditating, whatever we are, that is ourself. But we forget about it. We forget that the self is what we are and what we use when we interact with the others. So when we are facing with autistic populations, with these autistic kids, do they know that they exist? This question is exactly what I asked ages ago to myself when I saw the newborns that I'm testing, and I was thinking, do they know that they exist? Okay, you know. So is it not a funny question? So, but in this way, what is you? What is yourself? What is this self? And you know what happening with the autistic populations, that quite often, they don't like to see themselves in the mirror. They don't like to watch themselves while we're doing that. So that is interesting because we are using that in our lab in order to help them to include the self. Sorry, is it questions or is can you see I wanted to have questions and then I keep talking. I'm trying to be faster, okay? And then there is this other, just to know, the third, the salience network, that is a sort of a controller, and that is something that is a network that allowed to control the two mechanisms, when to send information to the default mode network and when to send to the central executive networks. And is a sort also of network that allowed to have the interoceptions, so the sensations that we have. And it's very much related to rewards, okay? This is interesting because when you talk about the autism, for example, or other atypical development, the rewards is coming on very, very often. There are techniques that are applied and using mainly the rewards, okay? So in somehow this network is involved in the atypical development as well. So here, sorry, okay, this is in Italian, but it's just I didn't have time to translate that. So when we talk about these impairment, let's go back to the executive functions. So what we can see when these executive functions are not working, they are very impaired in keeping the attentions. They are some sort of hypoactivations. They are very slow in doing things. They are, walking in a different way. Usually they walk with the points, okay, the feet. So they are different kind of behaviors that need to be controlled and observed. Okay. I don't know Italian. So the question is, how can we help children to cope with these networks? How can we help them to use some of these networks in a different way? Okay, so when we study this neural cognitive atypical development, what can we do? Usually what the research does, the first one is written, you choose a diagnostic group, for example, the dyslexia, okay, or ADHD, and then you compare that with the typical development children, okay? And then you confront these two. But there are two main problems when you do that. The first one is that there is a lack of homogeneity. So even within the same diagnostic group, they have the same label, but may have different abilities and disabilities. And this is very important to consider. The other one is the lack of sensitivity. So cognitive difficulties are the same as in same pathologies, but they could be that there are this word that is comorbidities. So there could be more than one disability. So we need to be very attentive that when we select a group like the autism, for example, they are so different. So the variability that we were talking about at the beginning is really to take into considerations. And this is the problem that we have, because if we consider them as a group, the possibility to be effective in our intervention is very low, okay? So this is a center in Cambridge, which is called CALM. And this is what I discovered just recently, that they are exactly having the idea that we have in our lab, but they have money, they have more time, more tools, and so they are much better than us. But what they do is to select, again, you see, big numbers, like the one that they presented in a course that I went, is number 437 children, okay? But look how many diagnoses do they have, okay? With the frequencies, can you see different frequencies of that? So what is that? Those are completely different one with each other. But if you put them together, then you can see that in order to define, for example, different abilities or disabilities that they have, and they extract like vocabulary, reading, and math, you can that they can have problems in all three areas in the same way. Okay, so they can you see 28% have problem in both reading and math, and also vocabulary and the 13%. So there are some interactions that we need to control. So instead of using labels, it's much better to use dimensions. So they did one thing that is interesting in here, just an example. So if you think in terms of fruits, okay, so you have the lemon, you have the lime, you have the strawberries, you have the melon, okay, and you create this learning machine. Okay, so in these learning machines, you include these characteristics. So, for example, the size, the acidity, and the seeds, okay, all these fruits, and then you put them in these learning machines. And what is coming out is on the basis of these three. What is coming out is that the lime and the lemon will be grouped together, far away from the strawberries, and the lemon and the watermelon will be connected together. So if we compare exactly these ideas on these atypical babies, instead of saying this is autistic, this has an ADHD, we just include these abilities or disabilities like memory, vocabulary, listening, skills, attention. What we will see is that we will group babies not more in the terms of definitions, okay, but in terms of difficulties, cognitive difficulties that they have. And if we include in these learning machines also other characteristics like the brain, like the curvature, thickness, depth, okay, all these ideas that are objective, we come out to include in these learning machines all these components, elements like cognition, cortical aspects, other aspects of the brain, then we come out no more with labels, but with networks, okay, that will define the children in a different way, in a completely different way. So this paper is nice, is remapping the cognitive and neural profiles of children who struggle, has difficulties in learning. So what is underlying is the importance of the dimensions of the dysfunctions rather than the label. Identify relationships between symptoms independently of the diagnostic group and the potential value of working on the subgroups according to the identified dimensions. I hope that this is clear. So this is what I mean in terms of not working on the classical neuropsychology, but working in terms of the constructive approach, where it's considering the way of the starting point and all the cascading effects, and the idea that how the environment can interact with that in a dynamic way, okay? So when we have these kids, there is no cure, no pill, no magic solutions. We have to work and trying to compensate and stimulating different aspects. The main thing is to work on the way in which they inhibit or non-inhibit their actions, the way in which they reason, and the way in which they are aware of their self. Okay, so three aspects that need to, and are very important to consider. Okay, that is already done. So what she say is stress and frustration needs to be taken out. We need, according to these interconnections, we need to work on actions and movement. According to these aspects of the default mode network, we have to make the children relax and happy to work and interact with the environment. We cannot stress them and increase their frustrations. The self needs to be involved. So to be in this particular space that is defined in terms of proprioception is another important aspect. So make the individual aware that it exists, and it exists, he and she exists within a specific space, whatever it is, okay? Everything is possible if we have the possibility to use techniques that allowed us to do these stimulations. Nowadays, the digital instruments are important because they are so nice for them and allowed us as a researcher to stimulate specific cognitive aspects, specific aspects that can be important in terms of difficulties that the babies and the children have. Okay. And another, okay, sorry, I know that I don't have very much time. Why do we use that? Because the brain is stupid. I mean, it's very clever from one side, but what the brain is doing is always trying to make coherence, in what it sees. So we, for example, if we have an idea about something, the way in which we will remember something that we have experience with will be very much related to our memory, so to what we have, our ideas about that. Okay, so our brain is not objective. He's just keeping information in the way that he wants, okay, or we want. And so that the brain is ingenious. So we can make the brain to think whatever we want, okay, because we have a different control in our attention. I can show you one thing. Maybe you know already this task. In this task, let me see if it's one of the other one. Okay. Yes, awareness. So have you ever, I don't know if you saw this task anywhere. So you have to concentrate. There are two teams, the white and the black. They are playing basket. They are sending the ball to each other. So what you have to do is to concentrate only on with the white color, dressed in white, and you have to count how many times these white individuals of the team are making the passage. Okay, so how many passages they are doing? Okay, just read it. Just count it.
You are about to take part in a quick experiment. Take a look at this.
Oh, sorry, this is the other one. Okay, sorry, this is another one. Forget about that. This is another example. Watch exactly that guy. Okay, just watch. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. You are about to take part in a quick experiment. Take a look at this. Okay, now, did you happen to notice anything? Watch again.
Did you notice something weird? Poor you. I talk too much. Let me show you then without. Can you see the difference?
See any changes? Don't worry if you didn't see that it's two different men. It means your brain is doing exactly what it should be. It's focusing on the meaning of the scene rather than on the irrelevant details. Imagine how much energy
this is what our brain is doing. It's not watching what is the reality, but is what's the meaning. The meaning of what you are doing has the main part of that. So we can work and stimulate the brain in the way that is different. Okay, so look at that. The illusions is so big here. So everybody's watching this ball and bigger than the other one. Okay, but this is not true. So we have illusions that are forced on our brain, but we still, even if we know that, we watching again that what happened. Oh, sorry. Okay, here we are. If we watch that, it seems again that is bigger. Okay, so the brain is working in a very funny way, and we need and we can use these informations to control in a different way our stimulations. Let's move more on these other things because we don't have very much time. Let's show you this. This is the virtual reality. The virtual reality is allowing to work on putting the subject in situations where you can feel things that do not exist. Okay, so look at that thing, for example. Can you see? It seems very weird that is. They are very, very scared. Okay, they try. They laugh, but they are really scared. Look at why they are scared now. Okay, because in the virtual reality, in the what they see is this. And if you measure that, your heart rate is really increasing. You are really feeling that emotions. Okay? So you can work in these systems and create a completely different situation. What you know, for example, that when you present your stimuli on a 2D, your memory is less activated compared to when you are living the situation. So putting yourself in the situation allowed you to have a better memory. Let's move further, and I can show you directly. Look at that. This is an experiment. In here, you can use that to stimulate the oculomotor activity. So when you put a child in front of this situation, you have sound and visions that allowed to help the child to coordinate their action. Look how strong is this effect. Let's see if the sound is. Sorry, I usually leave that. It's great. So this sound is becoming faster and faster. And it's amazing when you see kids that are able to do that, even the ones that usually are not able to coordinate their actions. Okay, so we can work through that and help them to direct their attentions in a different way. Okay, let's move further. No, this is one that I was turning before. Sorry. So let me show you now and reach directly. Sorry. Let's go. Okay, our experience. And here I will help, ask Irene for some help. We built this lab. We called that Multisensory Digital Lab. In this lab, we are creating everything we said before. We are trying to make fun and ask, thanks to our colleagues, how to enter in their difficulties using what are the potentials. Okay, so we use cartoons that they like. We use interact with other between different children. Okay, so let me, Irene, do you want to show your you want to share the screen so you can show a few movies that we have already selected?
Do you want to see the one we have on YouTube?
Yes, maybe it's better.
Okay.
So can you do that for me?
Yes.
So we can. Is that okay? Is it clear? Who are you? We are not discussing.
Oh, by the way, if you're interested in our activities, this is our Facebook page. You can follow us and stay updated. So here we have some videos of what we've done in the recent times with virtual reality mainly. So maybe we can start from this one.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yes, yes, go ahead.
Mama shape.
This is very similar to the one that I told you before, you saw before. So is that is because the sound is because there is one kid which is actually premature babies, 25. The gestation was 25 weeks of gestations, and he loved this music because he's playing that with his grandfather, and so we are using the music that he loves. He's very bad in coordinations, and he has to do this kind of task, okay? So touching the ball when he reads, but there is a sound on it, okay? And he has also to move through these things. So that is just an adult, because we are not, we prefer not to show you our kids, so we are not allowed for privacy. And so that is what I mean, what I said before. Okay, you want to show others so that we can...
Yep. This is our collaborator, which is not great in organizing things. Okay, maybe here we go. Okay, this is something similar to work on.
Sorry, Irene, the Ocular Hands 3, which is
okay.
Yeah, I think that
it was just a different topic, so I was continuing with the physical aspects, but this is something related to visuospatial abilities. So he's trying to work with three-dimensional objects and fitting them into this kind of jigsaw puzzle or something like that. But we have many other activities that address this point with children.
For example, this can be done in a two-dimensional or in three-dimensional. And it's so nice to see how these kids are working and what the way in which they reason to create and make the solution of that, okay? Because if you want to create a success, to have a success, you have to move around the three dimensions. And when they are autistic, sometimes they are very rigid, even in the actions. And so allowing them to move more. Can you see with the hands? This is really something that I don't like, Irene.
No, it was just to stress the fact that we can work on the hands, so on making the children training their hands, which is something they are sometimes impaired. So they have most of the time difficulties in the precise use of hands and fingers. So yeah, I agree. This is not the great.
No, it's just that I don't like the hands on the hands. Can you show you just for a second the one with like a Gabbiani, for example? When in here the idea is if you see that thinking about the autistic kids. They have one big problem. So when there are too many stimulations, they are. Let me show you.
Gabbiani.
When they have two stimulations, they are really stressed and they don't like it, so they're trying to look down. So when you speak, you have a face, you have a mouth that is moving, you have the eyes, you have so many distractors. And so we were thinking, what about if we just keep a focus on the only part that is important when you talk, okay, when you speak, which is the mouth. And so we present the person that is making the words, producing the words, while the object is there.
È ora di fare I compiti.
And the same thing we do with also in sentences, okay? So we start with the word and when we include the sentences. In this way, the children tend to be more concentrated, okay? And more concentrated in what is important to extract information from the language. So this is the idea of using these practical things. So we have now really hundreds of softwares and stimuli that we are using with our children. And this is the way in which we want to work on that. So whatever they are, whatever the definitions, the label that they have, we are helping them to improve, okay, and to work in a way that they love to come. So when they come to our lab, they never want to go away. Some of them want always the mom, so our aim is to trying to do that without the parents present, because they need to be independent in their research, okay, in what they do. Okay, sorry, maybe we can stop here. Sorry for being so long, but I really needed to give you some ideas of why we and what is on the back of these new technologies, not just using computer, okay? It's something really more and important to that. Okay, thank you, Rene. I just shut up. If you have questions or whatever, and we don't have very much time. Okay, sorry.
Can I ask a question about the 3 networks?
Yes.
So in the default mode network, you mentioned also that we arrive to state, or that is active when we are in a state like a meditation, and you said about the creativity, but then you also said about no emotions, which for me seemed, because usually the executive functions are the ones that control emotions. So for me, it seemed like a contradictory to when the executive functions weren't active, that also emotions would be.
I don't know if you know, the emotions is a cognitive processing, okay? So it's not something that is outside the cognition, okay? It's a cognitive processing means that is something that is modulating other processing. So if you are scared, you pay more attention, okay? Or if you are scared, you have a worse, so better maybe involvement when you study, but during exam, if you're really scared, you don't remember anything, okay? So emotions can play a role interfering or helping the learning mechanism. But when you have to create, it's like if there is an empty space, okay? Meditation is really an example. If you meditate and you feel emotions, you are not meditating. Okay, so meditation is to be in a place when you look outside the windows and you don't do anything, and suddenly something is coming out. Okay, there's no emotion, there's no feeling. The emotion is taking you in the other network. Okay, in the default mode network, you are producing. How can I say? It's a place where you are not doing anything. There is a place, for example, the creativity is also in animals. Okay, so you don't need. There were an example that I showed of a dolphin that goes in the water, and when they need, in order to find food, they scratch the soil, okay, the sand, to find the food down there. But if they scratch, they hurt themselves, okay? So what they invented is to use some spongy that they found in the sea, and they take the spongy in order to scratch, and then they eat, okay? So this is a creativity. It's something that cannot be necessarily planned with frontal, very sophisticated areas, okay? It's something that comes using and putting in a creative way the things that you have around you. Emotions are out of that. I cannot be really included in this creativity, okay? So when you feel about being happy of your creations, it's something that comes after. Okay, like the rap, for example. Rap, when you sing rap songs, you have to create the songs, or the jazz music is creativity, okay? You create without having a real plan. Okay, so you have the learning technicians and things that are done before, But then when you create, you use in an automatic way what you have learned, and you leave the creativity to come out. Okay, so
the emotions are basically taking you to the other network.
Yes.
And then after the calm state, you go back to the emotion, basically.
Of course, you do that in a very dynamic way, so it's difficult to control.
Okay.
And also the contradictions that you are right to see is that within the default mode network, is it also you and the idea of self. So is whenever you are the self, the idea of ourself is there. Okay, so the meditations, the creativity means to put yourself into what you're doing. Okay, so you cannot create without yourself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do we see daydream? Do we have daydreaming in this default?
Default mode network?
Yeah.
You know that I think that I can say yes. I'm not really sure, but it's where the imaginations is coming out. So it should be what you define daydreaming. Is it what you say? So
yeah. In that moment in which you totally lose the presence of time. And you start creating and floating in your mind and creating, imagining things.
Definitely, and it's exactly what, for example, when you teach, I did this course about creativity with these teachers, and I had to convince them that you have to give them the space to do nothing and to do imagination, to make a completely different story and not what you are studying. When you do that, so, okay, you are concentrating on your work. And then suddenly you say, okay, let's wake up, don't stand up, go outside, have a walk, and then come back, okay? When you come back, everything is clearer, okay? So there are something that is helping to take the things away in order to come back to that network, okay? And in that space, imagination and what you don't, the dreaming, as you said, is so important. Yes.
Excuse me?
Yes, where are you?
How has the pandemic situation affected learning in small children? Is there any information that I could access to read about it?
About what? Sorry, about the I couldn't get to the first things that you said.
How the pandemic has affected the developments in learning in children.
Yeah, okay. So these are typical development, you mean? Okay, there are some contradictions, I think, that I'm going to say. From one side, it was really devastating because you isolated them from whatever they were reached at school, all their obtainments, okay? So when you were inserted in the class, you started to know better the features and so on. On the other side, there was this funny things that... which is not funny, that they had the opportunity to stay longer with their parents and stay at home with no stress, with no, timing and doing things. And many parents were reporting that they were actually better. If I think our Raffaele or other children that we have, the parents were saying that, okay? So they feel better. They feel relaxed, they had their own space, okay? Less frustrations, because to go to school and being stimulated continuously is sometimes a stress for them, okay? Because they are not able to do these things like the others. So in this same way, there were good aspects and bad aspects, of course, because they were isolated, but also for the parents, because the parents are needed. What they need is to have also other people that help them, because it's really stress to have these kind of children 24 hours a day and stay with them and completely concentrated, on them. So for the parents, it was quite hard, I think. But for them, it was some sort of both good and bad. Okay, there are some one things, for example, for the autistic groups is they have a huge amount of stereotypes. We know when they keep doing things. So we had one child that every day had to go in the street and touch with a hand all the cars, and go to the hospitals and go take the lift and go up to the 8th floor and then go down every day, every day to do 10, 20 times a day, these things. So the mother had to do that for years. There was this pandemic and she said, we cannot go out. And he said, okay. And he stopped that, okay? So the mother was, oh, wow, he knew that. He knew. So how come that he stopped to do that? Okay. So it was one thing that she obtained. So I don't know. We can say many things about this pandemic, and and everything is going to be true.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And what happens with these children when they become adolescents and they don't have a socio-emotional self-conscious?
Yeah, this is exactly what we are facing in our group, in our lab, because we have kids that develop and they are reaching developmental stages that are critical for the typical developments. And so they are critical for the atypical as well. Okay, so when they are adolescents, they are having the same kind of consequences of being adolescents. So they are in a very critical situations and they have to control that. For example, one thing that happened and is I say because is something that is normal. So we had one child, and now we have two children. Actually, the second one is having the same problem. That suddenly, when he went either to school or to us or whatever, he used to take his peanuts out of the pants. Okay, for no reason. Okay, just that. Can you imagine to be in the church or to be at school? What does it mean? So the parents were really terrified by that, okay? So he had this need to touch himself, okay? And he had this with no constraints because he doesn't really care about what the other thinks because they don't know that the others are thinking something different from them, okay? The theory of mind. So they are just doing things. So the problem is how to help them to control these, which is actually stereotypical behavior, okay? It's becoming a stereotypical behavior, but it's a behavior that is not accepted in the society. So many times the thing that we have to do is to try to help them to not do things that are not really acceptable, okay? So we do that, but in a way that we don't force them not to do or keep them or, frustrating them, but just making some alternative, okay? So when they do that, instead of, stressing that, we are just doing other things, okay? Very attractive. So if he does that, we just make another thing, okay? Or we stop doing what he likes, okay? So he's watching the movie, taking the peanuts out, and then the movie is switching off. Okay. Oh my dear, So then he knows, he understands the connection with that, and so he stopped doing that. Okay. Not because we are saying not to do that, but because he likes the movie. Okay. So we are giving alternative with stimulations and things that he likes. Okay. So he forgot.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So from your answer that you just gave, it seems that like the basic laws of classical conditioning and operant learning, and do they work normally also with atypical children?
Okay. If you think that this is working with animals, with I mean, it's not because the atypical children are animals, but it doesn't really take a big effort from the brain to connect that. It's an implicit learning. Okay, so this implicit learning is allowing to control that in a different way. Okay, so that is the interesting part. Okay, so we can use that without them to be aware of what is happening. Okay, so these implicit things is really useful because you are taking away a situation that is really making a problem. Okay, and at the same time you are creating that. But there is one actually technique which is called ABA, which is the technique that is mainly used, especially in Italy, to help with the kids, which is based on the reinforce, okay, of something. Okay, so if you want them to produce the word mama, okay, you give them, okay, Irene has done the course, so it would be better that if she described, but it's a sort of correlation. Whenever you do something good, I reinforce that, okay, which is the salience network. Okay, so they used to do that in order to increase the possibility that they use the words mama. Okay, then there is one step more, because that mama things needs to be generalized to other words. Okay, so it's quite a long way of doing. And actually I hate that technique, because it's just working on one system, okay, in one network, rewarding, without considering that we could work and help the kids to develop other abilities. Okay, so we use sometimes these sort of implicit learning, but it's just something that we need to do in order to control some bad situation, or to use that to increment and make a wider amount of stimulations to the baby. So we want them to see more as possible. So we want them to interact as more as possible with the environment, because we know that the brain is creating these connections. Okay, so we are very much aware of what is going on in the brain in each kind of stimulations. Okay, and that's why is a different perspective. We are using research in order to help our knowledge, what we know, not just what we are researching, but other labs are doing. And so we can putting together, we are making a shorter distance between the university and what is actually working in the real life. Okay, so that is why I think that is important to share what we study with the reality, not just on the book.
I have a question, if I may.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So it's about the most effective forms of learning, as it was previously mentioned, the reinforcement and things. And I'm interested precisely in observational learning and how that may be effective. For example, if there were experiments like ever since Bandura and his experiment on observational learning, has there been something done when it comes to autistic children and explored more in detail?
Okay, typically the autism populations are not observing. So, I mean, they are not watching what you are doing. So it's very hard for them to learn what you are doing and imitate. Imitation is one of the first social impairment that is usually described for the autism populations. Okay, so using that, I don't think that is a very good idea, because they don't imitate, they don't even look at you. The impairment, the definition of autism, especially with the DMS-5, manual that describe a diagnostic manual, is that there are two main components. One is the social impairment, and the other one is the presence of these stereotypical actions. Okay. So when you go to the first one, the relations, what happened is that the children are not capable to interact with the others. And that is the main point. Interaction with the others means looking into the eyes, directing the attentions when somebody is talking with them. Some of them have problem in touching the others or being touched by others. Some of them are not able to produce language. They don't use language at all. Okay? Some of them understand everything, but do not produce the language. Some of them even not understand unless they know how to pronounce the words. Okay, so they don't understand. If you say, there was one mom the other day that told me, when I ask my child, give me the pen, he gives me the pen because he knows how to say pen. Okay, but when I ask him, can you give me the tissue, please? He doesn't know how to pronounce tissue, and so he doesn't understand what I want. Okay, so it's interesting because in this way we can see that when we work with this population, the communication is a completely taking you in a different perspective. So maybe we have to start to work on the basis of how language can modulate what they know, and what does it mean to produce a name and at the same time knowing what that name is. Okay, so when I say pen, and I know that the pen is the pen. Okay, so language is one source, but many of them are not producing language. So there are many questions, open questions that we have to really face and understand. So imitation is one of the big impairments. So using the Bandura model and how to use that for the autistic population, I think that is not the right theory that we can use.
Thank you. But the reason I asked this is because a long time ago, I was reading something about how autism is much harder to diagnose in girls because autistic girls often tend to sort of imitate the social cues in their environment and to kind of behave in the way they think they're supposed to behave according to social standards. But this may as well be false. So I'm asking you.
No, this is, okay, the question about the autism is mainly present in the male populations. Okay, so is something that is present more in male than with a high percentage compared to female. So the question is, what do female have that protects by having autism, instead of saying, what do male have that are more autistic than the female? Okay, so the question is a completely different perspective in this way. The reason why I think you say that is because maybe these girls are not autistic. So the autism is a sort of syndrome, is a syndrome, so it has many different diversities in it. So there is a big, huge variabilities, and trying to define that is quite hard. I have to say that I was involved in a big Cost Actions. Cost Actions is a grant that is given by the Europe, from Europe, to work on meetings or different countries, networks of countries on the same topic. And I was the member from Italy, and we share these things and with the different professor and researcher of different countries. And what we really found is that one of the most difficult things is the diagnosis. And Italy, for example, is a very low level in this respect. We are not very good in diagnosis. To have a diagnosis of autism is quite hard. Okay, so we base that on few tests, like, for example, the ADOS 2 now is the one. But, you know, that is some sort of models, modules that you can fill, but then the kids can be like in a borderline, okay? Or you can stimulate them so that they goes out of these definitions of autism. So there are some difficulties. So I really think that if you're able to communicate, to do all these things, the level of autism that you have is much lower. Okay, so it's not that because they are more able to socialize, but it's because they are more protected by something. Could be also hormones, could be some other aspects that is not clear yet. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Who are you? We are. It's already 7:20.
So I understand there's a strong influence by the environment. It's not many modulated by genes.
Okay, you know, we did that in class. Okay, we talk about, but this is really a big another story, which is epigenetic. Okay, so whatever. So I remember when I was in London working with this with EEG with some autistic. Actually, it wasn't adults, and the mother came to me and she said, "Why? Why do I have an autistic child?" I was really, you know, what's the answer? No idea, you know. I say, I don't know why. We don't know why. Okay, so is it a genetic thing? We know that there is a component, genetic components on it. But what is the genetic components is very much determined also by the epigenetic factors that could be linked to the environment while you are pregnant, the mothers are pregnant, okay? And that is creating completely different interferences. So it's so difficult to find only one aspect, okay? So what is the factor? There are some studies that are showing, for example, post-mortem studies, that there is a huge, much higher level of metal components in the brain compared to non-autistic of the same age and the same area, the same place. So immediately the idea was that how the metal can be caused by, for example, the vaccine. Okay, so these are all ideas that are totally wrong, believe me. But the idea is that maybe this metal could be an environmental factors, but it's not due to the vaccine, but something that is present in the place where you live, or your mom lived, or your grandfathers lived. Okay, so there are situations that could have interfered with that. We know that, for example, premature babies, very heavily premature, there are high percentage of autism within that population. But we also know that the cause of premature birth could be due to environmental factors as well. Okay, so to find the cause of that is quite a hard job, I have to say. So there's no clear answer. So, was it too bored?
So I think that if there are no more questions, we could conclude the meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you all for being here with us, and especially thank you, Professor Farroni, for having held such an interesting meeting and event. So once again, I encourage you to follow us on social media, and I think Georgia has sent links in the chat. So yeah, just go and check it out to be always updated. So yeah, see you next time.
Thank you for the invitation.